Hello, and welcome to a brand new day of free-to-play here on Magic the Gathering Arena. Get the dish on the latest with me, Lord Rumfish. So if you haven't heard the hype, Homelands Remastered is coming to MTG Arena. And Wizards has announced that the set is going to be released for draft and sealed. This is amazing. I'm frankly stunned that it's an old set. It was never designed with, modern principles of creating a set for a limited environment. But with that being said, it's going to be a new way to play. This is going to open up, new ways to test our skills here in limited formats. So I'm going to dive in today and give an overview of the Homelands limited environment and try to prepare you for what's coming. So there's a lot to discuss today. Let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so if you haven't seen a limited draft rating system before for how you rank the different cards, there's a scale that goes from 0 to 5 with sort of 0.5 grades in between. All right, so we're just going to cover it real quick. So 5.0 for that limited format, it's the best you can get. It means you're going to play the card regardless of what colors you're in. Normally 5s only apply to artifacts because most colored cards have at least some consideration of whether or not you can fit them into your mana base. So 4.5 is like an incredible bomb. Right, 4.5, you will not necessarily play it in any deck, but you're very tempted to. So 4.0, this is like a top tier uncommon or a good rare. 3.5 is like a top tier common or a solid uncommon. 3.0 is a good playable that always makes the cut. So any card that you draft that's almost always going to make it into a deck of that color is going to be like a 3. 2.5 is also a good rating on a card. It's a very solid playable. It very rarely gets cut from a deck. 2 is a good playable, but sometimes it gets cut. Maybe you have too many of them. Maybe your card quality is just really high. 1.5 is a filler card. Sometimes it makes it in, sometimes it doesn't. A 1 is pretty bad, right? It's a filler card that you're not very excited about playing. Often you cut it in the final deck list. A 0.5 is sort of like a sideboard card, right? You can't hardly play it in your main deck. And then a 0 means that you shouldn't really be playing it in limited at all, under almost any circumstance. All right, so let's dive into the cards here. We want to pay special attention to cards that are uncommon or common, right? When you draft up 42 cards, right, up to 14th pick, you're going to see, on average, in your card pool, you're going to see about 3 rares, about 9 uncommons, and about 30 commons. Now this is a small set, so you're going to see probably a lot more repeat uncommons and commons. There might even be a little bit more reliability with finding some rares than you would normally see. This set is 115 cards, and that is less than half the size of Phyrexia All Will Be One, right? I think Phyrexia All Will Be One has 271 cards, and Homelands has 115. So the limited formats are likely to get solved a lot faster because of this very small card pool, but still, a new format is a new format. We'll take what we can get. Should still be fun to try it out. All right, starting off at Abbey Gargoyles. Abbey Gargoyles is a fantastic card in Homelands Limited. There are not very many big flying creatures that exist in the format, and being an uncommon means that you have some reliability to see it. Abbey Gargoyles, I think I'd give this a 4 here. Right, it's hard to deal with. pairs up pretty well with some of the more common removal of the format. And it's one of the few good game-ending threats that exists in the format. The triple white means that it's not very splashable. So I don't think I can rate it higher than 4. Abbey Matron, this is a good solid common. Right, it comes down as a 1/3, helps to shut down the opponent's offense, and then you can pay a white and tap this to give itself an additional 3 toughness, so it can block and then become like a 1/6. And Abbey Matron, for this reason, can totally shut down opposing decks on their ground offense. This makes it a significant role player in white. And I would give this, it's between a 2.5 and a 3. If you're in white, this is one of your crucial creatures to shut down the opponent's offense. I think it almost always makes the cut. We'll call it a 2.5. So next up is Ace and Bureaucrats. Ace and Bureaucrats, so this would be a decent card in the format that has plenty of good targets to tap down. The problem with Ace and Bureaucrats, if you don't know the format, is that 1 toughness creatures are a trap. There are so many ways to kill 1 toughness creatures in this format. There's Dry Spell in black, that's a common. Serrated Arrows is common. Artifact removal, you're going to see Serrated Arrows just constantly, all the time. And Serrated Arrows could kill, 3 creatures like Ace and Bureaucrats as 1 card. In addition to Dry Spell and Serrated Arrows, red has a Naba Shaman. A Naba Shaman is a pinger, right? Just 1 red and tap deals 1 damage to any target. And even beyond that, there are, rares like Rebecca, Wizard Savant, and Grandmother Singir. There are so many ways to kill a 1 toughness creature in this format that even though Ace and Bureaucrats could do some work for you, it's very likely to die and get, swept up or give you card disadvantage against something like Serrated Arrows. And for that reason, even though it could normally do some work in a deck, I'm going to give Ace and Bureaucrats about a 1.5. Right? It's not useless. And if you're in white-blue, Ace and Bureaucrats could tap something down, and then your Giant Oyster could keep it tapped down and kill it. It's not useless, but it's pretty bad. 1 toughness creatures are pretty bad in the format. Ace and Crusader, this is a rare. There's not a lot of soldier and warrior support that exists in the format. So this is more of a a card to consider for constructed play. Right, maybe the soldiers deck wants to go tall instead of wide. But as far as Homelands Limited, right, there are not a lot of other soldiers and warriors that exist. You might be able to get it to be more than a 2/2 on rare occasion, but Ace and Crusader, it's kind of a filler card here. I'm going to give it a 1.5. It doesn't just die to any piece of removal, but mostly it's a 2/2 for 4, and it's not very special in most of the limited decks that you're going to build. Ace and Highway. So this is a strange one. White creatures have Planeswalk. This is symmetrical, right? So you have to be playing white to play this card, so if your opponent has white creatures, you're going to make them unblockable. So what you'd want to do with Ace and Highway is you save it for a critical moment where you can drop it down and give your creatures Planeswalk to make them unblockable. That only counts if the opponent has a Plains. Most of the time I would therefore say that this is like a 0.5, where it's a sideboard card. But if you're a white-blue deck, there's a card named Jinx. It's a common. It turns a land into a basic land type of your choice, and then you draw a card on the next turn's upkeep. If you have Ace and Highway and you have Jinx, then you can do a trick at 8 mana, right, where you're holding up both the cards in your hand. Then you drop down the Ace and Highway, play Jinx, all of your creatures that are white are unblockable, and all get in for combat damage, so it's sort of like a big Alpha Strike move to end the game. And so for most decks, I would call Ace and Highway a 0.5. But if you're doing the white-blue deck and you have Jinx, then at that point, I would say that, this would bump up to more like let's say a 3, right? You don't want more than 1 probably, but this plus Jinx is like a neat trick to potentially end the game after a long board stalemate. And this is an extremely defensive format. It goes extremely late into the game. So that's my rating for Ace and Highway. Usually a 0.5 for white-blue, maybe a 3. Up next, we got Beastwalkers. So this is a 2/2 for 3, which is, kind of about on rate. It's kind of a filler card, but a lot of the creatures are, below the rate that you're used to in this format, so a 2/2 for 3 is kind of fine. Nothing special. You can pay a green, and it gains banding until end of turn. And being able to gain banding does give this creature the ability to punch through in a board stalemate, where most other creatures in this format are unable to. Right, Beastwalkers could pair up with, some other sizable creature like Rashka the Slayer or Saraya Inquisitors, something like that. Or a large green creature, right, because it takes a green activated ability to use it. And it can actually get through the opposing blockers relatively well if it pairs up with a gigantic creature like that. Now, attacking on the ground is still not very good in this format. Beastwalkers is more able to do it than a lot of creatures. Gaining banding on defense also makes it an extremely powerful defensive creature. It costs double white to get it down and a green to activate it, so there's mostly one really specific deck, right? Green-white is the only one that wants this card. It's pretty good in that deck, though. I'll give Beastwalkers a 3 here. It really only is for that deck, right? The green-white deck. If it was just for, your typical white deck, give this, about a 1.5 or a 2. But for green-white specifically, I'll call it a 3. I'm going to say it pretty much always makes it in if you're green-white. Deathspeakers. So Deathspeakers doesn't die to Dry Spell. And it doesn't die to Grandmother Singer. But it does die to Serrated Arrows and a Naba Shaman. It's still pretty bad as a 1 toughness creature in this format. Better against a black deck, right? But it just doesn't have that big of a board impact, and it still dies very easily. Yeah, I'm gonna give this about a 1. Right, if you're up against a black deck in particular, maybe it's 1.5 or a 2 at that point. But it's not really that good in limited. Constructed applications might be pretty interesting, but limited, it's not that good. Hasdur the Abbot as a 2/5 for 5. It's a great blocker. Shuts down the opponent's ground offense very effectively. And he can redirect damage from white creatures to himself, which makes him an even better defensive play. Overall, I would say Hasdur the Abbot, if you're in white, he's about a 3. He's probably always going to make the cut and get into the deck. Leeches, in this format there is no poison, so Leeches is a 0. Leeches has some interesting applications as a sideboard card in best of 3 for standard. And I talked about that in another video. I don't think it's main deckable, but I think it's definitely like a sideboard play you could do against some poison opponents in constructed, but for here it's a 0. Mesa Falcon. Mesa Falcon's not too bad. It doesn't pair up well against serrated arrows. It does pair up just fine against Dry Spell and an Abbot Shaman, right? Just keep some mana open, you can pump up its toughness in response. And there are some ways to increase the Mesa Falcon's toughness. White has a couple of rares. Saraya the Falconer gives all birds +1/+1. Sarah Aviary gives flying creatures +1/+1. And if you're in white-blue, then you could get Coral Reef, and Coral Reef could put +0/+1 counters on the Mesa Falcon to bump up its toughness. There are ways that you can keep the Mesa Falcon alive. So if you open those rares, if you draft up that deck, then you can keep Mesa Falcon alive even in the face of serrated arrows. Just generally speaking, I would say Mesa Falcon's about a 2.5. It's a pretty crucial blocker in white to shut down other opposing flyers. Yeah, about 2.5. Prophecy, 1 white sorcery. Reveal the top card in an opponent's library. If it's a land, you gain 1 life. Then the player shuffles. And you draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. So this card replaces itself. It might gain you 1 life. You might gain knowledge of a card in your opponent's deck. Overall, I would say Prophecy's about a 0. It can help you churn through your deck by replacing itself with a card draw, but just being a cantrip is not enough to play it. Eventually, if all of your deck is just cantrips that kind of do nothing, 40% of the cards you draw are going to be lands, and you'll flood out anyway. So, I'm going to give Prophecy a 0 here. Rashka the Slayer. This is a fantastic white uncommon. So Rashka has reach. She single-handedly shuts down most of the ways that your opponents can try to win the game through the air. And if she blocks black creatures, she gets +1/+2 until end of turn. Rashka's a great card. Excellent defender, and not the worst attacker in this format either. 3/3 for 5 is kind of par for the course for Homelands. But being this big and having reach, she does not die easily to serrated arrows or some of those other removal spells, and this is one of the cornerstones, right, of building your sort of your white tank deck, because white is really an incredibly defensive color in this format, right? When I say tank, I'm kind of referring to MMORPGs, stuff like that, where you're the defender who just takes all the hits, keeps all of your teammates protected. White is incredibly defensive and just shuts down all of the opponent's offense in Homelands. Leads to an enormous board stall. Rashka is a big part of that. She's not as good as the Abbey Gargoyles, I would say, but she's top notch. I'm going to give her like a 3.5 here. Samite Alchemist. This is not as bad as it looks in this format. Having 2 toughness means that the opponent can't just easily pick it off, and its activated ability is going to prevent things like, Dry Spell and a Naba Shaman and combat damage and First Strikers and all kinds of stuff. Samite Alchemist is going to keep your board protected, keep the opponent from being able to punch through. So even though, you tap the creature, it can only prevent it to a creature you control. So you can't use Samite Alchemist to tap an opponent's creature. But even though it taps down and doesn't untap on your next untap step, just the extraordinary defense of this card makes it relatively playable in the format. Right? The second one's not as good as the first one, and the third one's pretty bad, but I would still say in this format that Samite Alchemist is, about a 2. About a 2. Alright, Saraya Aviary. This is a rare. Creatures with flying get +1/+1. This does bolster the opponent as well as you. It's a symmetrical effect. It's a world enchantment, so that means if the opponent has a world enchantment out, when you play this, it'll blow it up. If the opponent gets a world enchantment, it'll blow up your Saraya Aviary. But the world enchantments are rares, so that's, not too likely to happen. And you can take advantage of this symmetrical effect, right? If you're building your deck to take advantage. So this can pump up, if you've got Saraya the Falconer, it'll pump up your Falcons. Saraya could pump up your, in blue, Giant Albatross. It's going to make your Abbey Gargoyles bigger. And then if there are other flying creatures around the format too, right? Green's got a Willow Fairy, or a Leaping Lizard can gain flying, or, as a rare, there's like Fairy Noble. If you get Saraya Aviary, you can just start picking up all the creatures with flying, and, you don't have to treat them as having 1 toughness necessarily. Getting this down is going to let your flying creatures live where they normally wouldn't against the removal spells of this format. So you can break the symmetry on this card, you can build around it, make a deck. Just dropping it into any deck is a little bit dangerous, right? If the opponent has more flying creatures than you do, then you might not want to play this. I'm still going to give this card... I think a 3.5. It does not always make the cut into every deck, but it's a great build around. As long as you have more flyers than the opponent, then you can break the symmetry on this card, and you can, outsize the removal spells of the format. I think it's pretty good. Pretty good stuff. Saraya Bestiary. So this is a premium white removal spell for this format. Unfortunately, it costs 2 white mana for the rest of the game. Every upkeep you have to pay 2 white or you sacrifice this. But the enchanted creature can't attack or block, and activated abilities with the tap symbol can't be activated. There are some crucial things that you need to stop in this format. And you don't necessarily have to play the Bestiary right away, depending on how threatening the opponent's card is. Like, Giant Oyster is one of the most dangerous cards in this format as far as just stopping your ability to attack. But you don't have to play the Bestiary on it right away, right? Giant Oyster leads to a board stall. So you can let the board stall out, keep the Saraya Bestiary in your hand, and then once you're ready to make your move, you can play out 1, 2, 3 copies of Saraya Bestiary, lock down all of the opponent's Giant Oysters, and suddenly all of your flying creatures can get through. Right? So you can come in with your Abbey Gargoyles and things, and the opponent may not be able to recover in time. Also, there will be times where Saraya Bestiary just saves your life, where you need to play it early, even though it's going to tax your mana. If a black deck gets an early start with Singular Bats, and then they enchant it with Feast of the Unicorn. It's where they have this, 5/2 flyer that's suddenly coming in every turn. You've got to stop it. It doesn't matter if it costs 2 white mana every turn, you've got to stop it. This is, a premium piece of removal. One of the only pieces of removal. So, for that reason, I'm going to say Sarah Bestiaries, I'm going to call it a 3. Almost always makes the cut into the deck. The second copy is not as good as the first copy, right? You don't want to be paying 4 mana a turn or 6 mana a turn if you don't have to. But still, it enables you to interact with some of the opponent's things that you otherwise just could not. It's pretty crucial in that regard. So, and the later it is in the game, the longer you can hold it in your hand and wait to deploy it, the better it is. I'm going to give it a 3 here. It's very important, despite the costing you mana for the rest of the game. All right, Saraya Inquisitors. This is just kind of a solid, reasonable creature in the format. 3/3 for 5 is kind of par for the course. And if it blocks or becomes blocked by a black creature, it gets +2/+0. So black is one of the stronger colors of this format. So pairing up nicely with black creatures is very handy, right? Saraya Inquisitors can punch through Cemetery Gate, right, or some other big black creatures in the format. And that is useful. They can do it on attacking as well as defense, which is a rarity. Most things in this format work on defense, but not offense. So, Saraya Inquisitors, this is one of the better things you can pack into your white deck. It's not as good as the Gargoyles, it's not as good as Rashka the Slayer, but I'm going to give it a 3. I think it almost always makes the cut into your final white deck. Games go very long. You've got time to deploy all of your 5-drops over the course of the game. I'd say in your white deck, you run about as many of these as you get, really. Sarah Paladin. So 2/2 for 4 is not that exciting, but tapping to prevent 1 damage can keep your creatures alive against things like a Naba Shaman and Dry Spell. And it can prevent damage to any target. So Sarah Paladin can even blank, a Naba Shaman damage trying to go to your face. And for that reason, I think Sarah Paladin is one of the better white creatures here. Can also, shut down an opposing flying creature that was getting through. And it can pay 3 and tap and give a creature vigilance, which this is the only creature that can give vigilance in this format. It's the only vigilance I think that exists in this format. Unfortunately, it doesn't pair up very well with Giant Oyster, but does pair up pretty well against the other colors. So I would say Sarah Paladin's this is about a 3.5. Yeah, I think the ability to tap to prevent the damage might be a 3.5 here. It's one of your better white cards. No, I'll give it a 3. I'll give it a 3. It's I don't think it's as good as like Rashka the Slayer and Abby Gargoyle, but it's really good. I'll give it a 3. All right, Saraya the Falconer. So she's a 2/2 for 3, right? That's not exciting on its own, but she gives bird creatures +1/+1. This is a symmetrical effect. It can bolster your opponent's birds as well. But if you get Saraya the Falconer, you can make sure you pick up as many birds as you can, right? So you get Mesa Falcons, you get Giant Albatross, you make the bird deck. She pushes your birds up out of range of the removal spells of the format for the most part. And then she can give birds banding until end of turn. So she even makes them more effective attackers than they would normally be. on top of the +1/+1. Banding's also a really good defensive ability for blocking. So Saraya, if you're not in the birds deck, you know, she's a pretty filler card at that point. She's like 1.5 for a 2. But this is a fantastic build around. Right? In the birds deck, where you are, you know, getting all the birds with Saraya the Falconer, then she's easily like a 3.5 in that deck. One of the key parts of it. Really good build around rare. Trade Caravan builds up currency counters. You can remove 2 on the opponent's upkeep to untap a basic land. This would actually be useful in the format because of how mana hungry all of the decks are, and white in particular has a ton of activated abilities and things that are mana sinks. However, being a 1 toughness creature, dies to just about everything, is not much of a board presence. So, unfortunately, Trade Caravan, this is borderline unplayable. I'm gonna give it a 1. You know, the untapping mana on the opponent's upkeep could be important and would come up, but it just dies so easily in this format. It's about a 0.5 or a 1. And Truce. Rare instant for 3. Each player can draw up to 2 cards. They can choose to gain 2 life instead of a card draw, right? So a player could, you know, draw 2 cards, draw a card and gain 2 life, or gain 4 life. Because this is a symmetrical effect, I don't think it's especially valuable. So unless you're doing some weird niche strategy where you're trying to mill the opponent out, right? Maybe a blue-white deck, or you just kind of turtle up with giant oysters and try to mill the opponent out. Maybe you could run Truce in that deck and see if you can tempt the opponent into drawing cards to mill out faster. But yeah, I'm giving this like a 0.5. It's borderline unplayable. That brings us to the end of white.